Rain poured relentlessly as Ethan sat slumped on an old wooden bench in the city park, his clothes soaked through, his hands trembling. In his grip was a crumpled, water-stained photograph, a little boy with bright eyes and a wide grin, frozen in time. Ethan stared at it as if it were the only thing tethering him to the world. Passers-by walked quickly past him, umbrellas raised, eyes averted. No one stopped. No one asked. They just saw a homeless man on a bench in the rain, not the man he once was. Only a year ago, Ethan had a home, a job, and above all, a son who was his entire world. But a sudden accident shattered that life in an instant, leaving behind silence, grief, and a pain so deep it swallowed everything. He had pushed away his friends, quit his job, abandoned everything familiar, convinced he didn't deserve any of it without his son in the picture. The bench had become his refuge, or maybe his prison. He hadn't spoken a word to another human in days. His eyes weren't just tired, they were vacant, emptied by sorrow, not by hunger. He didn't even notice the rain anymore. It was like background noise to the storm inside him. As the photograph began to fall apart in his hands, so too did the last pieces of his will. He didn't know what he was waiting for. But deep inside, a quiet part of him still hadn't let go completely. Not yet. A small pair of rain boots splashed near the bench, breaking the rhythm of falling raindrops. Ethan barely lifted his head, expecting just another passerby. But instead, a little girl stood in front of him, holding a bright red umbrella that was far too large for her tiny frame. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her jacket was pink, her face round and curious. In her other hand, she held half of a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil. Without a word, she extended it to him. Ethan blinked, unsure if she was real. He looked around, confused, until his eyes met those of a young woman standing a few feet away, the girl's mother, watching nervously but not interfering. The girl gently nudged the sandwich closer. His hands didn't move. He couldn't remember the last time someone had offered him anything, let alone with such innocence and warmth. Finally, his fingers slowly reached out, and she placed it carefully in his palm. Before turning to go, she pulled something from her pocket, a small, folded napkin. She placed it beside him on the bench. Then, she skipped back to her mother, the red umbrella bobbing with each step. Ethan stared at the napkin, slowly unfolding it with shaking fingers. In messy crayon handwriting, it read, "You look like you need a friend." The sandwich sat untouched in his lap, but something inside him cracked, something that had been frozen for too long. He pressed the napkin to his chest, and for the first time in months, he cried. That night, long after the rain had stopped and the streets had emptied, Ethan found himself standing in front of a building he never thought he'd return to, not like this. It was a small community shelter tucked between an old church and a row of shuttered stores. He had volunteered here years ago, back when life still made sense. Back when he used to flip pancakes for kids on Saturday mornings and laugh like he meant it. Now, his reflection in the glass door was almost unrecognizable. He hesitated, hand hovering near the door. Shame crept up his spine. But then he remembered the little girl, the red umbrella, the napkin still folded safely in his coat pocket. Her simple message echoed in his mind, "You look like you need a friend." He stepped inside. The warmth of the shelter hit him immediately, physically and emotionally. Soft voices, the faint scent of soup, and the hum of fluorescent lights made the air feel less heavy. Before he could turn around, a voice called out. "Ethan." He looked up. It was Angela, one of the longtime volunteers. She stared at him for a moment, her expression shifting from surprise to concern to recognition. "You used to cook here, right?" she said softly. He gave a weak nod, eyes down. Angela didn't ask what happened. She didn't flinch at the worn clothes or the sadness on his face. She simply smiled, took his arm gently, and said, "We've missed you. Come in. You still matter." And just like that, Ethan stayed. The days turned into weeks, and Ethan slowly began to reclaim the pieces of himself he thought were lost forever. At first, he barely spoke, offering only quiet nods and small gestures around the shelter, stacking chairs, sweeping floors, washing dishes. But the rhythm of service became his therapy, and the simple acts of helping others started to mend what grief had broken. One evening, a young man named Jordan arrived, angry, bitter, and on the verge of giving up. Ethan saw something familiar in his eyes. That same hollow ache, the weight of something too painful to say out loud. Instead of pushing, Ethan sat with him during dinner, told him a story about his son, and listened when Jordan finally broke down. That night marked the start of something new, for both of them. Ethan began mentoring those who walked into the shelter lost and afraid, just as he had. He didn't preach. He shared. His honesty became a quiet beacon for others navigating their own darkness. People started looking to him not just as a helper, but as proof that healing was possible. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. The little girl from the park walked through the shelter doors, this time holding her mother's hand. Her mom was donating clothes. Ethan stood frozen for a second, overwhelmed by the memory. The girl recognized him instantly, beaming. Ethan knelt down, pulled something from his bag, a worn sketchbook filled with his son's old drawings, and handed it to her. "Keep this," he whispered. "It's full of dreams." 1 year later, the community center buzzed with life. Families, volunteers, and donors gathered for the annual fundraiser. Laughter echoed through the hall, the smell of baked goods filled the air, and a small stage stood at the front, decorated with handmade signs of hope. Ethan stepped onto that stage, no longer the broken man from the park bench. His hair was trimmed, his clothes clean, his posture steady. But what stood out most was the quiet strength in his eyes, the kind that only comes from surviving something that nearly destroyed you. He looked out at the crowd, spotted familiar faces, Jordan, now working at the shelter, Angela, smiling proudly, and in the front row, the little girl with the red umbrella, now holding the sketchbook he had given her like a treasure. He took a breath. "I used to think my story ended the day I lost my son," he began. "I let grief swallow everything, my home, my purpose, even my name. I was just a man on a bench, waiting for the world to forget me." He paused, eyes glistening. "But then someone reminded me, that even the smallest act of kindness can hold a person together. A child shared her sandwich. A napkin said I needed a friend. And someone welcomed me back without asking for an explanation." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "I stayed," he said, voice breaking, "because someone believed I was still worth saving." The crowd rose in applause, and Ethan smiled, for the first time, truly meaning it.